So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Go to Antique Obsessions for the hottest in jewelry, antiques, repurposed, solid sterling silver, one-of-a-kind, handmade by Bruce and Jaja. Go to our Facebook, which is Antique Obsessions, or you can go to Etsy.com and go to Antique Obsessions, one word, or type it into your Google and find us there. Thanks.
Tribal, primitive, rustic, Burning Man, punk rock, conceptual subculture for the edgiest, most cutting-edge designs of jewelry today. Go to Etsy.com/shop/conceptual subculture, or one word, either by going to Google or search Etsy, ETSY.com, and type in one word, conceptual subculture. You will find the hottest designs using natural stones with wire wrap rings, rough, raw, genuine, semi-precious gemstone jewelry, solid sterling silver, copper, leather, orgonite, bracelets, pendants, chokers, men's copper cups with sterling accents, eco-friendly, repurposed, original, one-of-a-kind design earrings. Support MBN by going to Conceptual Subculture on Etsy.
Warning, warning, everything I say is fucking crazy and should not be reinterpreted or reenacted because you will be either shot or NDAA'd. Warning.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is November 24th, 2017, and joining me today is a very special guest. He is a member of the prestigious Lear jet family. He is a very decorated, well-known CIA pilot. I mean, so many awards. It'll have your head spinning, folks. It's a real honor to have him with us, Mr. John Lear, joining us now. Go to the phone lines. John, you there?
Hey, I'm here, Bruce.
Hello, John. Thank you so much for being on our show today. It's a great honor to have you on, Mr. Lear.
My pleasure, Bruce.
Okay. Now you're a very well decorated pilot. Let's see here. It says that you're the only pilot ever to hold every airman certificate issued by Federal Aviation. That's amazing.
Right.
Wow. So tell us about that. Tell us about your career as a CIA pilot, a commercial pilot, and your time as a CIA pilot.
Well, I tried to get into the airlines, but back when I was doing that in the middle 60s, they had a test called the Stanine test, and it was a test they gave prospective pilots. The airlines gave prospective pilots to see whether they were cut out to be an airline pilot. And I failed the test. So I got turned down by United Airlines and by TWA and Flying Tigers. But I did get a job with Flying Tigers flying their Lear jet that they had just bought.
Right.
So I did that for a year or two, and then started just to get, different jobs. And I worked for Norman Larson Beechcraft there in Van Nuys, and then I was chief pilot of Clay Lacy Aviation for a year or two, and then I heard about this company that was ferrying forward air control airplanes, which was the Cessna 337, called the O2B, O2A and O2B, and called them up, and they were looking for a pilot, and I happened to know the chief pilot, and so he put me right on, and I started flying. We'd get the brand new airplanes there at Wichita, and we'd fly to Vietnam, and it took about 21 days and about 66 flight hours, and we'd go from Wichita to Hamilton Air Force Base in San Francisco. Then we'd go to Honolulu. Now that trip was an average of 17 hours and 30 minutes. We had no co-pilot, no autopilot, and it was a pretty long flight. And so then we'd get to Honolulu, and we'd rest for a day, and then go to Midway Island, and that was about 7-hour trip. Stay overnight. Then the next day we went to Wake Island, which was about 8 hours. Stay overnight. Then we'd fly to Guam, and we stayed at the Strategic Air Command Base, Anderson Air Force Base. Stayed overnight, and then flew to the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base. And when I was doing these flights, Chuck Yeager was flying the Weather B-57s out of there, and I'd always go up to his office and hang out for a while, and he was always real nice to me, and he knew the family and everything. And from Clark Air Force Base, we flew in-country to Nha Trang, and we'd take everything out of the airplane, the ferry tanks and the life raft and the life vest and all the equipment there, and just take back to Wichita the essentials, the life raft and the life vest and stuff like that.
Right.
And then we'd get a ride on with some Air Force plane. They were always going all over, down to Saigon. And in Saigon, it would take a couple days to get out of there because we were civilians and we didn't have permission to come into the country. And so we had to pay a fine and stay in lockup for 3 days, and then they'd let us out. We go back. We usually come back through Hong Kong, where we go for a little R&R, and then come back through Tokyo, back to Los Angeles, and they'd give us a couple days off. Then we go to Wichita, pick up another airplane, and do the same thing all over again. I did that for 4 years, 67 through 70, and then went to work for Clay Lacy Aviation, flew his Lear jet for a while. And then in 1973, I was down at the NBAA, the National Business Aeronautics Association in Dallas, and a friend of mine said that a friend of his had just bought 7 ex-Braniff 720s, which is just like a 707. And would I like to go to Seattle? They were taking an airplane. I said, sure. So I hopped on the airplane and flew up to Seattle and saw how these guys flew that 707. And I thought, I can do that. And so I applied as a pilot, went through the training, which is about 6 weeks. Then when it came time I was just hired as a co-pilot. But after the check ride, the chief pilot called me and he said, would you be interested in being a captain? And I thought,
wow.
Sure. You know, I was only 27 and there weren't that many seven captains around at 27, but
why not?
They put me on and I flew for a couple years for them, and they transferred me down to Las Vegas where they flew the what they call the gambler junkets, where we'd go to these different cities all over the United States, pick up a plane load of gamblers, take them back to Vegas, and they would stay there 4 days, and then we'd come back to the place where they were from and go to another place, pick up more gamblers, and I did that for a couple of years, and then they wanted me to move to Berlin because they had just bought Air Berlin, but I didn't want to do that because they weren't paying that much, and I didn't want to move.
Right.
So I applied for a job as a 707 captain with Trans-Mediterranean Airways in Beirut, Lebanon, and that seemed to be more appealing than Berlin. And they hired me. I went to Beirut, where I lived for a couple years. I went through their training, which was 3 months. It was 12 weeks, and very intensive training and everything. I mean, we had to build a radio. We had to go through air law. We had to go through navigation, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Anyway, I finally got on the line there and did that for a couple of years. And they went around the world once a day. So if you got on the round the world, there were 60 different stations that they did. And it was really interesting because I went all over the place with that company. And the reason they hired expatriates to fly is because they couldn't check out that many of the Lebanese. And so there was mostly American captains there. And I did the round the world flights for a year or so, and you'd leave Lebanon, then you go down to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, then you go to Bombay, which is now called Mumbai, and then to Kuala Lumpur, and then to Manila, and then to Osaka, Japan, then Anchorage, and then Anchorage to New York, New York to Amsterdam, and Amsterdam to Beirut. And that usually took a couple weeks. And then I did the Dubai base for about 6 months, and there was a flight twice a week that went from Dubai to Kabul. And I was so interested in Afghanistan. That was before the Russian came in and took over, or tried to take over. And at the same time, I was reading Caravans by James Michener. Now, James Michener had spent time in Kabul, and he wrote this book called Caravans about the time that he spent there, and he went all over. And the stuff he talked about was so interesting that I wanted to see all that. Well, I didn't get to see it, but I did spend some time in Kabul and got to go down to the Caravanserais where they have where everybody would hang out. And they had built many hundreds of years ago when Afghanistan was not a desert, it was a fertile farmland. And they built these tunnels all over Afghanistan. And they used those tunnels to irrigate their crops, their farmlands. So when we went into Afghanistan in, let's see, it would have been 89 or 90, we went in because we needed, there's a piece of land called the Hindu Kush, which stretches out the northeast of Afghanistan, and it's a perfect climate for growing poppies. When we got into Afghanistan, the Taliban was trying to outlaw the poppies. Afghanistan was producing 5% of the world's opium product.
Wow.
And 4 years after we went in there, they were producing 96% of the world's illegal opium product.
Wow.
And they would smuggle it out. And I just realized that nobody knows about those tunnels. And I know how they're smuggling it out. They're using those tunnels.
Right.
But a couple of years ago, a friend of mine that was over there heard about some American soldiers that were down in the tunnels for some reason, and they came upon a flying saucer about 30 feet in diameter. So one of the guys in the group went over and touched it, and when he touched it, he disappeared.
Oh, wow.
And, I don't know whether they ever heard from him again, but it's a way that the extraterrestrials have a way of anybody that's near there that they don't know. All they have to do is touch the saucer, and they're instantly in suspended animation until the ETs get back.
That's incredible, Mr. Lear. It reminds me of that Rendlesham Forest episode where some officer touched or got near a UFO craft, and like he got hit with like a bunch of codes, like a number, or like a coded message or something. That's all he could remember. Incredible.
That was Larry Warren, a good friend of mine, and Colonel Chuck Halt.
Wow.
Was the guy that went out the first night with the three others and did the exploration. They were trying to follow this one saucer, and I had a copy of the original voice tape that he made when they were trying to find that thing in the forest. And
incredible.
Turns out that there was a huge base, ET base, under Rendlesham Forest, and the ETs would pick up some of our soldiers, take them down there, and do something to them.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, I managed to meet Larry Warren and brought him out here to Vegas for a couple of days, and we were on the Art Bell show together. And I haven't seen Larry for a long time, but that was a pretty interesting deal. People ask me how I got interested in flying saucers, and I wasn't all that interested. I had no idea that my dad was so involved, but in 1952, his company called Lear Incorporated got the primary contract from the Pentagon to research anti-gravity. And they had that contract for 4 years, 1952 through 1956. And at the end of 1956, we had operating flying saucers that didn't have the capabilities that ET had, but they certainly were far ahead of anything that anybody else had. And as far as I know, that's been kept secret since then, since 1956. Now, my dad got kicked out of the program in 1953, even though he was president and chairman of the board of Lear Inc. He opened his mouth too much talking to reporters about UFOs, and they kicked him out. Now, I don't know what they told him, but I suspect that they said something like, "Bill, we've been friends a long time, but you talk too much and we don't want you in this program. Now, if you say anything about it for the rest of your life, we'll kill your wife, your kids, your dog, your grandparents, your parakeet, your cat, and everything else." So,
dear God.
He never mentioned it to me, and he died in 1978. In 1985, I hosted a reunion of Southeast Asia pilots that flew over there, either with the military or the CIA, and I ran into a friend of mine, and we were talking. He flew A-10s, the Warthog, and I said, "Where all you've been based?" And he mentioned Bentwaters. That's the base at Rendlesham Forest. And I said, "Oh, that's where the flying saucer supposedly landed in 1980. He said, No, not supposedly. It did. He said, I didn't get to see it because I was confined to quarters, but I know the guys who did. And I said, you mean this stuff is true about flying saucers? And he said, yeah, it sure is. So that's what got me going into UFOs. And in 1980, 2 years later, 1987, Bill Moore and Jamie Chandray, the secret government sent them a copy of the Eisenhower briefing in 1952, where they were briefing the president on all the UFOs that they had stored and the entire history of the UFO. And a lot of this was in this briefing, and they mentioned MJ-12 as the head of the organization. Now, MJ-12 was formed by President Truman 3 months after the Roswell incident in July of 1947.
Right.
And MJ-12 still exists today. And
it's the Men in Black, right? The Men in Black.
Well, yeah, they're part of the program. And what most people don't know is, of all the people that live on the planet Earth, 25% are ETs dressed up as humans.
Wow.
And so anyway, I got to, the big thing is the detractors were saying that it was all bullshit, that MJ-12 didn't exist, that UFOs weren't real, da-da-da-da-da. So I knew that the General Jimmy Doolittle was a good friend of my parents. I grew up in Santa Monica, 222 14th Street, and Jimmy Doolittle and his wife Jo lived on 3rd Street, and they were always over at the house. I didn't know him that well, but I did know him, and so I knew that he was neck deep into the UFO thing. He wasn't actually a part of MJ-12, but he knew as much as they did, and they would send him on different missions. And his cover was, he worked for Shell Oil, and he had been retired, and he lived in Carmel, and I knew that my mom talked to him occasionally. So I told her, look, it's very important that I find out something. I need to know if MJ-12 is real. And when you're talking to Jimmy sometime, I would like you to ask him if it's real. So it took me about 6 months to get her to do this. And she called me and she said, well, I talked to him. And I said, what did he say? And she said, well, I said, Jimmy, John's getting involved in this UFO thing, and I'm not sure it's the best thing, but would like to know if MJ-12 is real. And he said, yes, Moy, it is, but I can't tell you anything about it. And so when I found out that was real, that really started me on more investigation.
Wow.
And I got involved in all kinds of crazy stuff. The Benowitz incident down in Albuquerque Benowitz was taking care of a girl that had been abducted, and she had described all of the place that she had been taken, and that place was Dulce, and that's where the original Dulce story started. I still have the written transcript when they did a regression with her, and the guy who did the regression was a guy named Leo Sprinkle. I don't know whether he's still around, but he was big time in UFO. And I've got the original, or a copy of the original regression, and that's what got me involved in Dulce. And a few years, or a year after that, I was up in Crestone, Colorado at the invitation of 8 of the foremost UFO investigators in the U.S. And one of them, named Tom Adams, he came over, he said, John, he said, I got this note the other day from a gal that lives in Henderson, and I can't research it, and I wondered if you would do it. And I said, sure. So he gave me this note written by Cherry Hinkle, and I've kept that name secret for 30 years, but she's come out, and she doesn't mind me using her name now, but
well, that's good.
I got in touch with her, and she told me the whole story about Dulcie, that she knew one of the guards,
wow.
and that he didn't agree with what they were doing at Dulcie. It was a huge underground base operated by the ETs, and they had invited us to be part of it. And there was just all kinds of crazy stuff going on there. And he decided to escape, and he took with him an 8-minute video, 100 black and white photographs, and 25 black and white photographs, and 100 pages of technical information. And he made 6 copies of these, and put them in sealed containers, and gave close friends of his, each got 1 container. And he said, now, if they catch me, I'm dead. But so keep that secret. Now,
wow.
I'll get in contact with you all every 4 months. If I miss 2 contacts for 8 months, then you can do whatever you want with the information. So in 1996, he had missed 2 contacts. He was obviously, they either caught him or he died or something. And so then the search was, Cherry Hinkle was one that had been given one of these packets with all the information. And she had hidden it down by Kingman. And before he had disappeared, we drove down to Kingman, and she showed me the mountain where she had hidden it. So in 1996, when he didn't show up, they went after to find this packet, but they never found it. I didn't get to go on any of his searches because at the time I was flying for American Transair, and I couldn't get that much time off. But apparently, and I've never talked to many of them, they made at least 3 attempts to find the packet, and somehow it had disappeared, and each one of the other 6 guys that had gotten the packet, all of their stuff had disappeared too, so we never got to see. But she had, when she was talking to this guard when he'd come to visit her, she had drawn some diagrams of Dulcie in pencil on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I think there was 5 drawings. And the guard would tell her, put this here, put that there. There was this here, there, and then he gave her a couple of pieces of paper with some technical information, but no photographs. And when I met her, she gave me this stuff and said it was okay to pass it out. So
wow.
I redrew the diagrams of the 5 pages of what it looked inside Dulcie, and those became known as the infamous Dulcie papers.
Wow.
And I was the guy that drew it. And I took it, now this would have been like 1988 or so. I sent copies of the Dulcie papers to all my friends, all my UFO investigator friends. And of course, they've been around the world several times. And so that's how the Dulcie papers got out.
That's incredible, Mr. Lear. I just want to remind our listening audience they're listening to the Godfather of Conspiracy. That's right, folks. Ex-CIA operative, experienced and decorated airline pilot John Lear is joining me. And It's just incredible what he is letting us know. This is a secret, hidden base you're telling us about, right? An alien base.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's in New Mexico. The town of Dulce is about 80 miles north of Los Alamos. Incidentally, I wasn't a CIA operative. I was a CIA pilot.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
They didn't tell pilots anything. Now, operators knew a lot more than I did, but I was just a pilot.
I'm sorry about that, Mr. Lear. You go ahead. I just wanted to ask you, during your time as a pilot, did you ever encounter any UFO in the sky?
Yeah. Once was in a Lear jet, 1966. I was descending into Los Angeles, westbound, and I had just been cleared out of 41,000 feet and was starting the descent. And I was looking out the window, and here comes this white object that looked exactly like the M2F2. And if any of you remember the $6 Million Man,
right,
and the crash, the thing that he crashed in, that's what I saw. That it was exactly that shape.
Wow.
And it went from the left to the right and passed me like I was standing still.
Unbelievable.
And then in 1988, I gave a lecture at the Spring Valley Library. Well, before I tell you that, the Dulce,
yes,
to investigate, see what I could find out in Dulce. So I go there, didn't know anybody, and in the evening, I called up the head of the highway patrol. I'm just trying to think of his name, and I said, "My name is John Lear. You don't know me." He said, "Yes, I do know you, John." He said, "You came here 15 years ago in a Learjet, and Dean Martin was filming a movie here, and he wanted his girlfriend here and some fresh steaks. And you were the one that brought it in, and I met you at the airplane." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And so he said, my work is from 10 in the evening till 6 in the morning, and I drive around all this area. And he invited me to go with him. And, well, I'll tell you, that was the most interesting 8 hours I had ever spent, because he told me all the UFO stories that he knew, and it was just really interesting. He passed away a couple of years ago, but I kept in touch with him over the years. So in the summer of 1988, I gave a lecture at the Spring Valley Library on UFOs. And they had invited me to do it. I didn't ask them, they invited me. And so it supposed to start at 6 o'clock. And so I showed up with, a couple of drawings and a couple of easels that I could mount it on. And I was there about 20 to 6, and a guy opened the door to let me in the auditorium, and it was jam-packed. There must have been 600 people in there. And I said, what are they doing here? And the guy said, "They're waiting for you." And so I went in and gave the lecture and did another one a couple weeks later. And that really lit Las Vegas on fire. I mean, there was so much interest. And a few weeks later, it just drove my wife nuts, because people were calling on the phone 24 hours a day, wanting this, wanting that, wanting to do an interview and all that. And she changed my phone number and hid all my research material to stop it. And so a guy named Gene Huff called me one day, and he said, "I'm really interested in your stuff." He said, "I'd like to get a copy of everything you have, including all the videotapes." And I said, "I'd love to, but my wife hid it all."
Oh, no.
And, he said, "Well, if you ever find it, I'll have a copy. He said, I'm an appraiser, and if you give me all that stuff, I'll appraise your house for free. So I told Marilee about it. She gave me all my stuff, and he comes over to start the appraisal and brings with him a guy named Bob Lazar. And Bob Lazar was his friend and was going to hold the measuring tape while they measured the rooms. And Gene and I were talking about UFOs, and Bob was sitting there rolling his eyes. I mean, he couldn't have been less interested. And we said, what's the deal, Bob? He said, this is all bullshit. He said, I worked at Los Alamos as a scientist, and if anything of this was true, I would have known about it. And so anyway, to make a long story short, over the next 4 months, we had given him so much information that he didn't work for Los Alamos anymore. He was doing he had a photo machine that he was doing photos for Gene, but he had been convinced that something was going on at Groom Lake, and he called Dr. Teller, Edwin Teller, the father of the H-bomb, in Lawrence Livermore, California, and he had known Teller from Los Alamos, and told him that he wanted to re-enter the science field, and could he help him? And Dr. Teller says, let me get back to you. So a couple weeks later, Bob gets a call and says, we'd like to do an interview, and we want you to come down to EG&G and spend a couple hours with us. So there was 3 interviews, and after the first one, it was just strictly scientific information. And after the first one, he came to my house, and I said, how'd it go? He said, I aced it. And I said, really? He said, yep, I had everything they wanted to know. And they talked about all kinds of different scientific research programs, and he said, I knew all that stuff cold because I had worked on it, a lot of that stuff. And then the next interview, the first question was, do you know John Lear, and what is your relationship with John Lear? And he said, I know John Lear, but I think he sticks his nose into places where it shouldn't be. And when Bob told me the story, he says, what I didn't tell him is that I also like to stick my nose into places that shouldn't be. And then there was a third interview, and the next thing I knew, on December 6, 1988, he comes over to my house in the evening, and I'm sitting there at my desk writing checks, and he says, I saw a disc today. I said, what? He said, I saw a disc today. And I said, you went to Groom Lake? He said, yep. I said, you saw one of the saucers? He said, yep, I sure did. I said, well, what the hell are you doing here? They're obviously going to follow you. Why don't you find out all you can and then tell me about it? He said, no. He said, John, I've seen you take so much crap for the last year that you deserve to know it's real. I saw it. I touched it. I was in it. And the whole thing is real. And his job was to try and back engineer the propulsion system for the UFOs. But he said, John, it's millions of years ahead of us. There is no possible way we could ever duplicate that. But of course, we have other ways to do anti-gravity vehicles, but nothing like ET has. So he worked there for 4 or 5 months, and then on March 22nd, 1989, these dates are burned into my memory. On the 21st, which is a Tuesday, he said, do you want to go see a flying saucer? And I said, yeah, how do we do it? And he said, they're gonna do a test flight tomorrow night, Wednesday night. And he said they always do it on Wednesday because that's when there's the least amount of traffic on the road that comes from Hancock Pass to Rachel and up to Warren Springs. And so the next night, me and Gene Huff, Bob and his wife, get in my motorhome. We drive out to Groom Lake to the the northeast road that goes in there from the extraterrestrial highway. And we went as far as we dare go without crossing the border of the restricted area. We get out, it's 9 o'clock. I'm setting up my Celestron 8-inch telescope, and there comes this bright light up from behind the mountains and starts doing all these fantastic, zigzags and disappearing for a second and then reappearing, a couple miles away. And I finally got my telescope set up, and it's very, very difficult to aim an 8-inch telescope at an object that's moving. But this thing started to descend slowly from altitude to behind the mountains, and I got it focused in, saw for myself it was flying saucer. It was oriented about 30 degrees to the horizon. It was goldish yellow, and it was radiating something off of its skin. It was throwing something off, which I never found out what it was. And
wow.
And I saw it for about 15 seconds, and it was about to disappear. And I said, "Gene, quick, here, take a look." And as I moved back, I accidentally hooked my foot and moved the tripod, so he didn't get to see it.
Wow. Some of these encounters, they were first spotted by the U.S. military in World War II when the Foo Fighters, right?
Yeah.
Some of this the sightings that started in World War II. Is it safe to say that the extraterrestrials or interdimensional deities? What I believe more along the lines of Carl Sagan's multiverse, or how they come in through these maybe interdimensional portals or whatnot. And it sounds like a comic book, but it's what I think is going on. I mean, did they help the Nazis develop this reverse engineered technology, John?
Yeah, of course. There's millions of different ETs, and on Earth there's hundreds of different ETs, but there's good ones and bad ones. And the bad ones are what gave the technology to Hitler, and they had an operating flying saucer. They, at the end of the war, they came to the U.S. About 3 months before the end of the war, and we were trying to build an atomic bomb at Los Alamos, the Manhattan Project. And we could build everything to make the atomic bomb work, except we couldn't make the plutonium. And over in Germany, they could make the plutonium, but they couldn't make anything else. So they came to us and they said, "We'll give you our plutonium so that you can bomb Japan. In return for, after the war, we want you to let 4,000 Nazis into your country."
Wow.
And so we agreed. That became Operation Paperclip. And it was operated by John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State, Allen Dulles, his brother, that was head of the CIA, and Eleanor Dulles, their sister, who was head of the Berlin desk in Berlin. And through those three, they let in the 4,000 Nazis who, for all intents and purposes, has taken over our country, and that's who essentially runs it today. When you hear some of the things that the secret government does, it fits right in with what the Nazi program was all around. Now, Hitler, after the war, went down to Antarctica, where he had a base there, and that's where the ETs have an enormous base, and that's why we're down there. That's why the U.S. is down there. And then went to Argentina, and then we offered him to live in the United States. He was sick, and we took care of him until he died in 1968.
Wow. He never died. He never died. Hitler never died.
No, after the war, no.
Unbelievable.
No, he lived, war ended in 1945. He lived until 1968.
So these Nazis are the ones that are behind this secret space program, possibly reverse engineering much of what I think is the UFO craft that we see today. I'm not saying I don't believe in interdimensional deities or anything. I think they're out there. But
interdimensional is real. But
yeah.
With their help, we have at least 15 orbiting direct energy weapons. And those direct energy weapons are the ones that destroyed World Center 1, World Center 2.
I want to get into that with you, Mr. Lear. I want you to tell us. This is why you're I'm a big fan of yours, and just a legend in my mind because of your beliefs on what happened on 9/11, how you exposed this. Tell us about the.
That's okay.
They don't want me to ask you this question. Anyway, tell us about the use of phantom technology on 9/11 and the Bush's role in that unfolding. Again, the Twin Towers, you believe that no planes hit the towers, and you have the only sworn affidavit that states no planes brought down these towers.
Absolutely not. Just to give you an example, the two Boeings that supposedly hit the towers, between those two Boeings, there's 6 million parts, 3 million for each airplane. Now, every single part down to a rivet is stamped with a code. When it's made, the FAA has to approve the facility where it's made, and then they have to stamp each part. And that is the reason for that is if it crashes, they want to be able to identify if that part was responsible for the crash. And of those 6 million parts, not one single part was ever found. Not only that, there's 4 enormous engines on the Boeing 757 and 767, and not one trace of those engines were found. Now, fire burns at about 550 degrees, and those engines run at 800 degrees. So there's no possible way a fuel fire from the alleged crashes could have burned those engines up. And so there's no possible way could have been airplane. What it was is holograms. And holograms are projected to make things either invisible or visible. And in this, they have a way of being able to put absolutely a life-size airplane. It looks exactly like an airplane. It sounds like an airplane. It's the color of the airplane. I mean, you can't tell the difference.
It quacks like an airplane.
It what?
It quacks like an airplane. It's an you think it's an airplane.
Yeah, and that's what people saw. And they say, oh no, I saw it. It was real. That's what holograms are. You
didn't see the wing disappearing? I mean, Mr. Lear, you put out all the intel out on it. I mean, the wing was gone. It was completely see-through.
Yeah, and it looked like going through sliced butter. Well,
yeah.
If an airplane actually hit a tower that has a construction of steel beams that are 12 inches in length or in width, there's no possible way. The first thing that would happen is when the nose hit, it would break off a tail because an airplane is made in 3 separate parts. The forward section, including the cockpit back to the labs, then the center section, which holds the wings on, and then the aft section, which holds the tail on. And if it hit a building, the first thing that would happen is that the tail would snap off. But those pictures that we saw, the CNN picture, it looked like the airplane was going through sliced butter.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just, and then the Shanksville airplane never crashed. After the 9/11, it landed in Cleveland and dumped off all its passengers who went into the hangar there, the NASA hangar, and then it took off and went to Groom Lake. Now, people say, well, no, they had a movie about it, and supposedly it crashed there, but nothing crashed there. There was a hole that was, 100 feet long, and they said that was the wings and stuff, but there's no possible way an airplane could disappear into the earth. Absolutely none. It was all fake. There was no airplane. Nobody was killed. And there's a little unit in the airplane called the ACORS, ACORS. And what it does, it records the engine temperature and speed. It records the navigation, where it is, and just a small amount of information, but it's updated every second. And that information is transmitted from the airplane to a satellite, and then from the satellite down to the maker of the airplane, in this case Boeing, and also to the engine maker, which is Rolls-Royce in England. And the ACORS information was being transmitted for 4 hours after the Shanksville alleged crash.
Wow.
So those 4 hours was just the time it took it to get back to Groom Lake. So then the Pentagon airplane was just a flyby, and what happened was a real 757 did a low pass going over the Sitco station, which is a mile from the entrance of the Pentagon, and as it became parallel with the part that the alleged crash was, they set off an explosive. It was either dynamite or C4 or something like that, and that's what made the hole in the Pentagon. But it wasn't a big enough hole for a plane to go through. And the lady, let's see, what was her name? I'm trying to think. She was a computer worker there, and she had her 6-month-old son. April. I can't remember. Anyway, when the bomb went off, it was at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was 40 feet from her desk, and the part of the ceiling came down. She picked up her son, went out the hole in the wall, out onto the grass to get triage. And the Army immediately shows up and starts telling her what happened. An airplane came through. You saw baggage. You saw seats. She said, no, I didn't see anything. And they said, you smelled jet fuel? She said, no, all I smelled was explosive, dynamite or C4. And she has stuck to her story ever since 9/11. It's cost her a lot of trouble, but she has never varied from her story. And so, let's see, 3, 1. Now, the Building 7, what happened there was an airplane, a hologram, was supposed to crash into Building 7 and destroy it identically as Building 1 and 2.
Right.
What happened is something went wrong, and they couldn't get that hologram to work. So it was supposed to happen at about 10:30, and so they waited around. They couldn't get it to work. They didn't know what to do. Finally, at 5 o'clock, they said, well, what are we going to do? And said, well, we don't have any choice. We've got to destroy the building. Maybe the public will be so stupid as not to ask a question of how that thing totally disintegrated with nothing hitting it. And so they destroyed it with the direct energy satellites. And you can see Building 7 just absolutely just coming down in a pile of nothing, because nothing's left.
It was dustified. I mean, all the buildings were completely dustified. I mean,
Yeah.
if they would have came barreling down towards Manhattan, I mean, that would have ruptured the bathtub. Manhattan would have been flooded, but that didn't happen. They turned to dust.
Exactly. Now, what happened is after 9/11, they wanted to rebuild the buildings, and the first one they started with was with the Deutsche Bank, And they started laying the foundation, putting up the steel, laying the concrete, and it immediately starts disintegrating. The steel comes apart, the concrete comes apart, and what was happening is this is the first time they used the direct energy weapon at full power. And what they didn't realize is when they lifted off the trigger after they were done destroying everything, that effect did not stop. And so anything that was built where those original buildings were would just disintegrate.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they built a reflecting pool and said this was in honor of all the people that were killed, and we're going to build a real nice reflecting pool. Right? They built the reflecting pool because nothing else would be able to build there.
Well, I think it's a little bit creepier as well. I mean, these are occultists that did what they did on 9/11, and it just looks like a big old cube, like the Kaaba that the Arabs pray to in Mecca. That's what they look like. They put in place, in the ground zero.
Yeah, they said that the Arabs flew those airplanes. I've been flying 35 years. I was probably one of the most proficient pilots in the air, and I certainly couldn't have hit a building that was 212 feet wide, dead center. It's just impossible. It cannot be done.
Possibility.
Everybody said, well, you just aim the airplane. I said, it's not that easy, because the airplane allegedly turned from going south to direct towards the World Trade Center over Colts Neck. And from the Colts Neck area to the building was like about 15 miles or so. And at 15 miles away, you cannot aim at the center of the building and hit it, within 3 or 4 feet of the center. It's just impossible. It can't be done. And I couldn't do it. And I know a lot of other pilots in the simulator after that tried to do the same thing, and they couldn't do it either. So that part of the story was ridiculous. And when Morgan Reynolds filed his complaint, the reason he filed the complaint is because the district attorney would not file it themselves. So there's a way that civilians, if the district attorney will not file it, they can file it themselves. And when I heard about that, I offered my services to tell them exactly why an airplane could not have been used in 9/11. And that was that 13-page affidavit that went to the New York state court, and the judge dismissed it without comment.
Of course, yeah. Well, Mr. Lear, it's just an incredible story. We're winding down towards the end of the show. I want to ask you before we go, what could you tell us about some of the experiments they do over in Montauk, or the Montauk Project, or Camp Hero? See, I've been watching this Netflix series. It seems like they've gone from covert to overt. They got the CIA and they're giving them scripts. I don't know, but they're talking about MK Ultra, and they're just bringing it to the consciousness of the people. What they do. Abductions, UFO, alien. They talk about it all in the show.
Yeah, I haven't seen that show, but
Stranger Things.
The people who are running the show now have gotten so big and so powerful. They don't care what anybody thinks. In Northern California, those fires, they're the ones that started it with the direct energy.
Absolutely.
Destroyed.
Thank you for saying that.
Structures, 200,000 acres of land, and killed, 34 or 40 people there. They just don't care.
Oh, no, they'll rip your mind out. They'll eat our souls. It's crazy. What about Camp Hero? What can you tell us about Camp Hero or the Montauk Project, if what you know?
I don't know anything about that. No. I'm always interested in what's going on in Montauk, but, you can't get the straight story.
All right. Oh,
those two guys that used to come around, I forget what their names were, You remember the guys that said that they were part of that project?
Yes.
What was the name of that gravity project in the 40s that they did, where the people were stuck inside the ship? What was the name of that project?
Gotta look that up. Gravity, an anti-gravity project?
No. It was a disappearing.
Disappearing.
I don't know how I could forget that name, but anyway, it's always, people wondered if it was successful, and it was. It was a complete success, and they have used all that technology to do just about anything they want. They have a way of hiding things. For instance, one of those secret bases where the black triangles fly out of is 44 miles south of Wendover, Utah. It's in Nevada. It's on a place called the Ferber Flats. It's just northeast of the Kingsley Range there, and it's a huge base.
Right.
But if you fly over it, you can't see a thing because they have developed holography so that it just makes things disappear. Same thing with the Nevada test site.
Right.
The huge new Sandia Air Base halfway between Tonopah Test Range and Groom Lake. If you fly over it, you can't see anything. It looks like desert.
Wow.
And there's a huge base there, so...
Absolutely. Mr. Lear, there's a lot of blue lights flashing as of late, in Utah. I heard you mention Utah. The Phoenix lights, there's these big flashes, these blue lights, and they all seem to be happening as there's hundreds of earthquakes happening along the San Andreas. I mean, it sounds like whoever's here with us is very pissed off at us.
It's not that they're pissed off. It's just, we know who's taken over and who's running the program. They have ultimate plans for us. They've built thousands of miles of 6-lane highways under the United States. They've built at least 20 major cities under the ground. They're getting ready for something, but they aren't going to tell us about it.
No.
But I'm sure you've seen all my posts on Facebook.
Yes.
Put a lot of this stuff up there in pictures, and people would be interested to see what I put up there.
Definitely, Mr. Lear. Give out your information. Where our audience can find you and support you and help you out as well.
Let's see. I don't have very much. I participate in thelivingmoon.com with Ron Schmidt, whose name is Zorgon, and I post on there occasionally. But Facebook is where I usually post, and that's about all I have.
What about your website, therealjohnlear.com? That's you, right?
Yeah, I don't put anything on there yet.
Okay.
Eventually I'll put some stuff on there.
Excellent. Well, one more question before we go, Mr. Lear. Again, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. If you could change one thing about the CIA, what would it be? What would it be?
Let me tell you this. I'm going to tell you why we're on Earth, and this is important for you to listen. Earth is a prison planet.
Yes.
And we have all, you, me, everybody, has lived hundreds of lives before this. The soul, life is eternal. The soul is eternal. You don't have to take a dunk. You don't have to eat a cracker. You don't have to beg anybody for eternal life. You've already got it. But apparently, in the last life, everybody that lives on Earth made a mistake. And we're down here on Earth to rectify the mistake. And the way we do it is to live our life with integrity, without envy, hate, or greed, and to express our love to our families each and every day. That's all we got to do. We don't got to make money. We don't got to be successful. We don't got to, round up all the women we can. It's just, that's all we got to do. Live with integrity, without envy, hate, or greed, and express our love to our families each and every day. That's it.
Beautifully said, Mr. Lear. Thank you so much for being on the show. I can't wait to talk to you next time.
Okay, anytime.
Thank you, Mr. Lear. That was the incredible, the amazing John Lear. I can't believe he joined us. An epic interview. And again, you can follow the show on Facebook at The Bruce Montalvo Show. Follow us on Twitter at Bruce Montalvo, my co-host, at Jaja. And we're going to say goodnight. We're going to say goodbye for now. And we'll be back on Monday, 9 p.m. Mountain Time with the latest news and reviews. It's been Bruce Montalvo, Bruce Montalvo's show. I'm very happy that you guys tuned in and you made some extra room in that belly, you know, for a little Bruce Montalvo show after stuffing yourselves for Thanksgiving. Anyway, thank you for tuning in, folks. Don't get abducted until next time. See ya.
You're listening to MBN Montalvo Broadcasting Network.